The center of Catholic power is moving right, now before our eyes. For centuries, Europe ruled the Vatican, but today, Cardinal Tagle stands at the heart of a historic revolution, the rise of Asia. With millions of new faithful and a bold vision for the future, Tagle is not just a candidate for Pope. He is the symbol of a church transformed, a church ready to speak, with an Asian voice to lead from the East and to change the world forever. This is the moment that will redefine faith identity and power for generations. Subscribe now and comment your thoughts. Will Cardinal Tagle reshape the future of the Church? Part 1. A new dawn for the Church. The world is changing, and the Catholic Church is changing with it. For centuries, the heart of Catholic power beat in Rome, echoing through the great cathedrals and marble halls of Europe. The papal voice spoke in Latin and Italian, and the faces of the cardinals were almost always European. But today, a gentle yet profound shift is underway. The future of the Church is no longer written only in the languages and cultures of the West, but is being shaped by the vibrant faith and unique perspectives of Asia. This is not a story of power seized, but of service offered, a new dawn rising from the East, illuminated by humility, mercy, and hope. At the center of this transformation stands Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a Filipino shepherd whose heart has been shaped by the gospel and the struggles of his people. Tagle's journey from the bustling streets of Manila to the highest corridors of the Vatican is not just a personal ascent. It is a sign, a living parable of how the Church is listening, learning, and opening itself to the voices and wisdom of Asia. In Tagle, many see the embodiment of Pope Francis's vision, a church that goes out to the peripheries, that seeks not to dominate, but to accompany, that finds its strength not in prestige, but in compassion and humility. The rise of Asia in the Vatican is not a mere demographic fact, but a spiritual movement. It is a call to rediscover the heart of the gospel, the joy of faith, the dignity of every person, and the hope that springs from mercy. As we journey together through this new chapter, let us open our hearts to the Spirit, who is always doing something new, always leading us beyond our fears and prejudices, always inviting us to walk together as brothers and sisters. For centuries, the Church's center of gravity has been in Europe. The great councils, the papal conclaves, the theological debates all took place under the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica. The Church's art, music, and architecture reflected the culture and sensibilities of the West. Yet even as the Church flourished in Europe, seeds of faith were being planted in distant lands. Missionaries traveled to Asia, Africa, and the Americas, bringing the gospel to new peoples and cultures. Over time, these seeds took root and grew often in difficult and hostile soil. In Asia, the Church has faced persecution, poverty, and marginalization. Yet it has also discovered a deep resilience, a capacity for joy amid suffering, and a spirituality that harmonizes contemplation and action. Asian Catholics know what it means to be a minority, to live in dialogue with other religions, and to witness to Christ through acts of love, rather than words alone. The faith of Asia is young, vibrant, and deeply rooted in family, community, and service. Cardinal Tagle's ministry was shaped by these realities. He learned to listen before speaking, to serve before leading, to weep with those who weep, and rejoice with those who rejoice. As Archbishop of Manila, Tagle became known for his humility and approachability. He walked the streets, visited the poor, and celebrated Mass in simple chapels. He listened to the stories of migrants, fisherfolk, and street children. He preached not only with words, but with presence, embodying the smell of the sheep that Pope Francis so often urges for pastors. His leadership style is not one of command, but of communion, not of authority, but of accompaniment. The Filipino Church is a church of the poor, a church that finds Christ in the faces of the hungry, the homeless, and the forgotten. Tagle's own family experienced hardship and migration, and he has never forgotten the lessons of compassion and solidarity learned in his youth. He often speaks of the importance of being present to those who suffer, of listening to their stories, and of walking with them on the journey of faith. His ministry is marked by a deep sense of gratitude, a recognition that all is gift, and a desire to serve rather than to be served. Tagle's Asian identity is not an accident, but a gift. Asia is the cradle of many faiths, a continent of dialogue, suffering, and resilience. Filipino Catholics, like many Asian Christians, have learned to live their faith quietly, to build bridges with people of other religions, and to find hope in the midst of adversity. Tagle brings this experience to the Vatican, reminding the universal church that true power is found in humility, that greatness is measured by service, and that the gospel speaks most eloquently through compassion. The Vatican's embrace of Asian perspectives is not just about numbers. It is about recognizing the gifts that Asian Catholics bring: a spirituality rooted in contemplation and action, a deep sense of community, a capacity for dialogue with other religions, and a resilience born of suffering and hope. In Tagle, the Vatican finds a bridge, a leader who can speak to the world from the heart of Asia and bring the world's needs to the heart of the Church. This shift is not without challenges. The Church faces persecution in some Asian countries, indifference in others, and the constant temptation to withdraw into itself. There are tensions between tradition and modernity, between different cultures and generations, between the call to fidelity and the need for adaptation. Yet the hope that Tagle brings is not naive optimism. It is rooted in faith, in the conviction that the Spirit is always at work, that Christ is always present, and that the Church is always being renewed. The story of Cardinal Tagle is not just his own. It is the story of a church being renewed from within a church that finds its strength in weakness, its unity in diversity, and its hope in the love of Christ. The power shift toward Asia is not about domination, but about service, not about exclusion, but about inclusion, not about fear, but about faith. As we look to the future, let us open our hearts to this new chapter. Let us learn from the wisdom of Asia, from the humility of Tagle, and from the example of Pope Francis. Let us become a church that is ever more merciful, ever more humble, ever more missionary. And let us walk together with courage and joy into the future that God is preparing for us all. Part 2. Cardinal Tagle, a shepherd formed by Asia. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's story is inseparable from the living faith of the Filipino people and the unique spiritual landscape of Asia. Born on June 21, 1957 in Manila, Tagle grew up in a modest family marked by both struggle and deep devotion. His father Manuel was a government employee, and his mother Milagros was a schoolteacher. Like many Filipino families, theirs was shaped by the values of hard work, sacrifice, and a faith that found expression in daily life, not just in church on Sundays. The Tagle home was a place of prayer, laughter, and openness to those in need, a small reflection of the wider Filipino culture where hospitality and community are sacred. From a young age, Tagle was drawn to the church, not just as an institution, but as a family. He served as an altar boy, sang in the choir, and learned to see Christ in the faces of the poor and the suffering. The Philippines, with its vibrant processions, fiestas, and devotions, offered Tagle a living catechism. Faith was not something abstract, but something woven into every moment in the rosary, prayed at dusk, the shared meal, the neighbor's helping hand during a typhoon, the simple joy of singing together. This was a faith practiced in the ordinary, a faith that endured through hardship and found hope even in darkness. Tagle's path to priesthood was marked by discernment and humility. He entered the seminary with questions and uncertainties, aware of his own limitations, but trusting in God's call. His teachers and spiritual directors recognized in him a rare combination of intellect and empathy. He excelled in his studies, eventually earning a doctorate in theology from the Catholic University of America. Yet even as his academic gifts blossomed, Tagle never lost touch with the pastoral realities of his homeland. He returned to the Philippines, serving as a parish priest, seminary rector, and later as Bishop of Imus, before being appointed Archbishop of Manila in 2011. As a pastor, Tagle was known for his accessibility and warmth. He rode public transportation, visited slums, and made a point of being present at wakes and funerals, no matter how humble. He listened to the stories of overseas Filipino workers whose sacrifices sustain families, but often come at great personal cost. He comforted families displaced by typhoons and floods, prayed with prisoners, and welcomed people of all backgrounds. Tagle's ministry was not about programs or projects, but about presence, being with people in their joys and sorrows, their questions and doubts. This pastoral closeness is deeply Asian. In much of Asia, the church is a minority, often surrounded by other faiths, and sometimes facing suspicion or hostility. Filipino Catholics, in particular, know what it means to be both resilient and gentle, to witness to Christ, not through confrontation, but through kindness and service. Tagle often speaks of the theology of tears, the ability to weep with those who suffer, to let compassion flow from the heart, and to see in every person a brother or sister. This is not weakness, but strength, not sentimentality, but the very heart of the gospel. Tagle's leadership style reflects the Asian value of listening. In Filipino culture, pakikinig, deep attentive listening, is a sign of respect and love. Tagle brings this spirit to his ministry, whether in a parish meeting, a synod hall, or a Vatican office. He listens before he speaks, asks questions before giving answers, and seeks consensus rather than imposing his will. This approach has earned him the trust and affection of many, from street vendors in Manila to fellow cardinals in Rome. His humility is legendary. Tagle is quick to laugh at himself, to admit his mistakes, and to deflect praise. He often tells stories of his own awkwardness or failures, using humor to put others at ease. He dresses simply, prefers public transport to chauffeured cars and lives with an open door. Even as he rose to international prominence, Tagle remained grounded in the daily realities of his people. He is as comfortable in a Vatican conference room as he is in a Manila shantytown, and he moves between these worlds with grace and authenticity. Tagle's theological vision is shaped by the Asian context. He believes that the church must be a church of the poor, and for the poor, echoing the call of the Second Vatican Council and the vision of Pope Francis. He challenges the church to move beyond its comfort zones, to embrace the marginalized, and to find Christ in the peripheries. For Tagle, evangelization is not about imposing doctrine, but about sharing the joy of the gospel through friendship, service, and dialogue. He encourages Catholics to build bridges with people of other faiths, to learn from their wisdom, and to work together for peace and justice. This openness to dialogue is crucial in Asia, where religious diversity is the norm. Tagle has engaged in conversations with Muslims, Buddhists, and people of indigenous traditions, always seeking common ground and mutual respect. He believes that the Church's mission is not to conquer, but to accompany, not to dominate, but to serve. In a world marked by division and violence, Tagle's commitment to dialogue is a powerful witness to the gospel of peace. Tagle's rise to global prominence accelerated when Pope Benedict XVI appointed him to the Synod of Bishops on the new evangelization in 2012, and Pope Francis later named him Prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, now the Dicastery for Evangelization. In these roles, Tagle became a bridge between the local church in Asia and the universal church. He brought the concerns of the poor, the marginalized, and the young to the heart of Vatican decision-making. He also represented the Vatican to the world, embodying a new style of leadership, marked by humility, mercy, and openness. For many, Tagle is a symbol of hope, a sign that the Church is listening to new voices, learning from new cultures, and embracing a more inclusive and compassionate future. His life and ministry invite all Catholics to rediscover the heart of the gospel, to love God and neighbor, to serve the poor, to build bridges of peace, and to walk humbly with God. In Tagle, the Church finds not just a leader, but a shepherd, a man formed by the faith of Asia, ready to help guide the universal Church into a new era of mission, mercy, and hope. Part 3. The Vatican's shift toward Asia. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as the symbolic and administrative heart of the Catholic Church, its domes and corridors echoing with the voices of European popes, cardinals, and theologians. The art, architecture, and liturgies of the Church have long reflected the cultures and sensibilities of the West. Yet beneath the marble floors and gilded ceilings, a quiet transformation has been unfolding, a shift in the very center of Catholic life, energy, and imagination. Today, the Vatican is opening its doors wider to the world, and the beating heart of Catholicism is increasingly found in the vibrant faith communities of Asia. This shift is not merely a matter of numbers, though the statistics are striking. In recent decades, Catholic populations in Europe and North America have faced declined secularization and new challenges. Churches that once overflowed with worshipers now struggle to fill pews. Meanwhile, in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the Church is growing youthful and full of hope. In the Philippines alone, there are over 85 million Catholics, making it one of the largest Catholic populations in the world. Countries like South Korea, Vietnam, and India have seen remarkable growth in vocations and lay participation. The energy, creativity, and missionary zeal of these communities are breathing new life into the universal Church. But the Vatican's shift toward Asia is deeper than demographics. It is a spiritual and cultural awakening, a recognition that the gospel speaks in many languages and takes root in many soils. The Church in Asia is marked by a profound sense of community, a spirituality that blends contemplation and action, and a capacity for dialogue with other religions and cultures. These gifts are not just for Asia, they are treasures to be shared with the whole Church. Cardinal Tagle's rise to prominence is both a symbol and a catalyst of this transformation. As prefect of the dicastery for evangelization, he oversees the Church's missionary efforts in over 1,000 territories, most of them in Asia and Africa. His leadership is not about exporting European models or imposing uniformity. Instead, Tagle listens, learns, and empowers local communities to live and share the gospel in their own cultures. He encourages enculturation, the respectful integration of Catholic faith with local traditions, music, art, and ways of life. For Tagle, the Church is not a fortress, but a family, not a museum, but a living body that grows and changes. This openness to diversity is crucial in Asia, where Catholics are often a minority, living alongside Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, and people of indigenous beliefs. The Church in Asia has learned to witness to Christ, not through confrontation, but through kindness, service, and dialogue. Tagle's own ministry reflects this approach. He has engaged in interfaith conversations, built friendships across religious divides, and worked for peace and justice in a region often marked by conflict and misunderstanding. His ability to listen and build bridges is a model for the universal Church in an increasingly pluralistic world. The Vatican's embrace of Asian perspectives is also a response to the signs of the times. Pope Francis has repeatedly called the Church to go out to the peripheries, to listen to the voices of the poor, the young, the marginalized, and those on the fringes of society. Asia, with its vast populations, ancient cultures, and complex histories, represents both a challenge and an opportunity for the Church's mission. It is a continent of suffering and hope, of persecution and resilience, of ancient wisdom and youthful energy. The Church in Asia knows what it means to be a little flock to witness to Christ with humility and courage. Tagle's leadership at the Vatican is marked by a deep respect for this diversity. He does not seek to centralize power or impose rigid structures. Instead, he encourages subsidiarity, allowing local churches to discern their own paths, respond to their own challenges, and celebrate their own gifts. He believes that the Holy Spirit speaks through the whole people of God, not just through hierarchies or experts. This approach is in harmony with Pope Francis' vision of a synodal church, a church that walks together, listens together, and discerns together. The shift toward Asia is also reflected in the Vatican's priorities and initiatives. There's a renewed emphasis on dialogue with other religions, especially in regions where Christians are a small minority. The Vatican has supported efforts for peace and reconciliation in countries torn by violence and division. There is a growing recognition of the need to protect the environment, promote social justice, and defend the dignity of every person concerns that resonate deeply in Asian societies. Yet this transformation is not without its challenges. The Church in Asia faces persecution in some countries, indifference in others, and the constant temptation to withdraw into itself. There are tensions between tradition and modernity, between different cultures and generations, between the call to fidelity and the need for adaptation. Tagle does not shy away from these difficulties. He speaks honestly about the wounds of the Church, the pain of division, and the need for healing. He calls for a church that is humble enough to admit its failures, courageous enough to ask forgiveness, and hopeful enough to begin again. The Vatican's shift toward Asia is ultimately a movement of the Spirit, a sign that God is always doing something new, always leading the Church beyond its comfort zones and into new paths of mission. It is a call to rediscover the heart of the gospel, the joy of faith, the dignity of every person, and the hope that springs from mercy. In Cardinal Tagle, the Church finds a leader who can speak to the world from the heart of Asia and bring the world's needs to the heart of the Church. As we witness this new chapter in the Church's history, we are invited to open our hearts to the wisdom and gifts of Asia. We are called to walk together as brothers and sisters, to learn from one another, and to trust that the Spirit is guiding us into a future full of hope. The Vatican's embrace of Asia is not about shifting power for its own sake, but about becoming ever more faithful to the mission of Christ to love, to serve, and to bring the good news to every corner of the earth. Part 4. Humility and Servant Leadership. The heart of Cardinal Tagle's vision. At the heart of Cardinal Tagle's ministry and the promise he represents for the future of the Church is a leadership style deeply rooted in humility, compassion, and the spirit of service. These qualities are not only central to his personal character, but also reflect the very best of Filipino Catholicism and the reformist legacy of Pope Francis. Tagle's approach to leadership is shaped by the values of pakikisama, solidarity, malasakit empathy, and a profound sense of community values instilled by his culture and lived out daily in his ministry. Tagle's humility is not just a personal virtue, but a theological conviction. He often reminds both clergy and laity that true greatness in the Church is measured not by power or position, but by the willingness to serve, to listen, and to walk with those on the margins. In his own words, a servant is someone who makes himself totally available. Being a servant is a relationship and not just a title. He urges leaders, both in the Church and in society, to abandon self-promotion and embrace a mission of self-emptying, echoing Christ's own example of servant leadership. This is not a passive humility, but a courageous one, the willingness to take risks for the sake of the gospel, to stand by principles of justice and mercy, even when they are controversial or misunderstood. This vision of servant leadership is especially relevant in a world and a church often tempted by the pursuit of status recognition and control. Tagle's call is clear. Greatness is not measured in terms of achievements, grace earned, or positions held. Greatness is measured in terms of being a true servant. He believes that joy and fulfillment come not from accolades, but from genuine service and the fulfillment of one's mission. This perspective is a direct challenge to the culture of clericalism and careerism that sometimes infects church leadership. Tagle's humility is also evident in his pastoral style. He is known for his accessibility, his emotional openness, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. He does not shy away from showing vulnerability. He has been seen weeping during homilies, embracing the afflicted, and walking among the poor. These acts of compassion are not signs of weakness, but of strength, a strategic compassion that fosters unity, dialogue, and healing. In Asian cultures, leadership is often exercised through consensus and humility rather than assertiveness, and Tagle embodies this tradition. His commitment to mercy and inclusivity is unwavering. Tagle's ministry consistently emphasizes the Church's mission to accompany the poor, the wounded, and the marginalized. He draws on the teachings of Vatican II and liberation theology, envisioning a church of the poor that listens before it speaks and walks with the wounded before offering solutions. This theology is not abstract. It is grounded in his lived experiences, growing up in modest means, serving in slums, and engaging with global humanitarian work. For Tagle, the Church's credibility and relevance in the modern world depend on its ability to be present, to listen, and to act with compassion. Tagle's influence extends far beyond the Philippines. As a former president of Caritas Internationalis and now head of the Vatican's dicastery for evangelization, he is engaged with humanitarian crises, refugee support, and poverty alleviation worldwide. His multilingual ability and cultural fluency make him a relatable figure for Catholics across continents. He is often described as the Asian Pope Francis, a leader whose warmth and approachability have resonated with Catholics seeking a more compassionate and inclusive church. However, Tagle's leadership has not been without challenges and criticism. Some question whether his soft-spoken style and preference for dialogue might be perceived as timidity or lack of decisiveness, especially in the face of complex administrative and doctrinal challenges. His tenure at Caritas Internationalis, for example, ended amid concerns about management and morale, though many observers note that Tagle's strengths lie more in spiritual vision and bridge building than in bureaucratic administration. Defenders argue that his subtlety and willingness to listen are not weaknesses, but strategic strengths designed to foster unity and reflection without alienation. The possibility of a Filipino Pope and Asian Francis would be a seismic shift in church history, signaling a more inclusive and representative direction for Catholicism. Such a move would bring the concerns of the global South, poverty, climate change, migration into sharper focus, and challenge traditional Western-centric narratives within the Church. It would also elevate the Philippines on the global stage, inspiring national reflection and potentially influencing domestic policies related to social justice and human dignity. Ultimately, Cardinal Tagle's vision for the Church is one of hope, humility, and global solidarity. His theology of action, rooted in empathy and mercy, offers a model for a church that listens, serves, and accompanies. Whether or not he becomes Pope, Tagle's prominence signals the Church's readiness to embrace new perspectives, to walk with the wounded, and to lead with the heart of a servant, a heart that reflects the very love and humility of Christ himself. Part 5. Mercy, the style of God. Mercy is not just a word in Cardinal Tagle's vocabulary. It is the very air he breathes and the foundation of his ministry. For Tagle, mercy is the style of God, the distinctive mark of authentic Christian life, and the most urgent need of the Church today. This conviction is deeply rooted in his experience as a Filipino, as a nation, and as a disciple of Jesus, who encountered suffering and responded with boundless compassion. Tagle's understanding of mercy is shaped by the gospel stories that have always resonated with the Filipino people: the Good Samaritan who crosses boundaries to care for the wounded stranger, the father who runs to embrace his prodigal son, the gentle healer who touches lepers and forgives sinners. These stories are not just ancient tales. They are lived realities in the Philippines, where poverty, migration, and disaster are daily experiences, and where neighbors often become the hands and feet of God's mercy. Throughout his ministry, Tagle has insisted that the church must be a field hospital, echoing Pope Francis's call for a church that goes out to the wounded and the lost. He believes that mercy is not a weakness or an excuse for mediocrity, but the highest expression of God's power and the most credible witness the church can offer in a broken world. Mercy, Tagle often says, is the face of God turned toward us. It is the embrace that welcomes the outsider, the forgiveness that heals the sinner, and the solidarity that lifts up the poor. Tagle's homilies and public addresses are filled with stories of real people whose lives have been transformed by mercy. He tells of families reunited after years of separation, of prisoners who find hope through the sacraments, of refugees who discover dignity in the embrace of the church. These stories are not told to impress, but to invite every listener to become a participant in the drama of God's mercy. Tagle insists that mercy is not a private sentiment, but a public mission, a call to action for every Christian. Mercy for Tagle is inseparable from justice. He is keenly aware of the structural sins that wound societies: poverty, corruption, violence, and exclusion. He calls the church not only to offer charity, but to work for justice, to challenge systems that oppress, and to advocate for the dignity of every human person. In this, Tagle stands in the tradition of the prophets and of Jesus himself, who proclaimed good news to the poor and liberty to captives. Mercy, he teaches, is not a way of avoiding difficult truths, but the only way to confront them with love. In the Asian context, mercy takes on particular urgency. Many Asian Catholics live as minorities, sometimes facing discrimination or even persecution. Tagle encourages them to respond not with resentment or fear, but with the creative power of mercy. He urges the church to be a bridge builder in divided societies, to reach out to other religions and cultures, and to show the world a different way, the way of reconciliation, forgiveness, and peace. This is not just diplomacy. It is the heart of the gospel lived in the realities of Asia. Tagle's own life is a testimony to mercy. He has been present in the aftermath of typhoons, comforting the grieving and helping rebuild shattered communities. He has visited prisons, listened to the stories of the condemned, and prayed with those who feel abandoned. He has sat with migrants and refugees, learning their names and stories, and advocating for their rights on the global stage. In all these encounters, Tagle embodies the Church's mission to be a sacrament of God's mercy in the world. Mercy also shapes the internal life of the Church. Tagle calls for a church that is patient with those who struggle, welcoming to those who feel excluded, and willing to forgive those who have failed. He challenges the church to move beyond legalism and rigidity, to rediscover the joy of the gospel, and to offer healing to those wounded by sin or scandal. For Tagle, the confessional is not a courtroom, but a place of encounter where sinners are embraced and sent forth renewed. This vision of mercy is not always easy. It requires humility to admit our own need for forgiveness, courage to reach out to those who are different, and perseverance to work for justice in the face of resistance. Tagle does not pretend that mercy is simple or sentimental. It is costly, demanding, and sometimes misunderstood. But he is convinced that mercy is the only path to true renewal, for individuals, for the church, and for the world. In his leadership at the Vatican, Tagle has made mercy a guiding principle. Whether addressing global humanitarian crises, advocating for migrants and refugees, or shaping the Church's missionary outreach, he insists that every action must be rooted in compassion and solidarity. He reminds the Church that its credibility depends not on wealth or power, but on its willingness to serve, to forgive, and to heal. Tagle's emphasis on mercy resonates deeply with Pope Francis's vision of a poor church for the poor. Together they call the Church to be close to the suffering, to listen to the cries of the marginalized, and to be a sign of hope in a world too often marked by indifference and division. Mercy is not a passing theme, but the very heart of the Christian message, a heart that beats with the love of Christ and calls every believer to go and do likewise. As the Church's center of gravity shifts toward Asia, Tagle's witness to mercy offers a roadmap for the future. It is a future where the Church is known not for its power or prestige, but for its compassion and its closeness to those in need. It is a future where every Catholic is invited to become an agent of mercy, building a world where no one is forgotten and everyone is welcomed home. Part 6. Synodality. Walking together as Church. At the heart of the Church's renewal in the 21st century is the rediscovery of synodality, a way of being Church that emphasizes walking together, listening deeply, and discerning God's will as a community. For Cardinal Tagle, synodality is not a passing trend or an abstract concept. It is the very path by which the Church can remain faithful to the gospel in a rapidly changing world. This approach, so strongly advocated by Pope Francis, finds a natural home in the Asian context and in Tagle's own pastoral experience. Synodality comes from the Greek word synodos, meaning journeying together. It is a vision of the Church where every member laity, religious priests, and bishops has a voice and a responsibility in discerning the direction of the community. This is not about democracy or majority rule, but about attentive listening to the Holy Spirit speaking through the entire people of God. It is a way of honoring the diversity of gifts, experiences, and perspectives that make up the body of Christ. Tagle's ministry in the Philippines, a nation of islands and diverse cultures, has taught him the importance of dialogue, patience, and inclusion. In Filipino culture, decisions are often made through consultation and consensus, with an emphasis on harmony and respect for all. Tagle brings this spirit to his leadership in the global Church. He is known for his ability to listen attentively, to ask thoughtful questions, and to create spaces where people feel safe to share their hopes and struggles. In recent years, Pope Francis has called for worldwide synodal consultations, inviting Catholics everywhere to reflect, pray, and share their insights about the Church's mission. Tagle has been a key figure in these efforts, helping to facilitate conversations that cross continents and cultures. He believes that the Church's credibility depends on its willingness to listen, especially to those who feel unheard or marginalized. For Tagle, synodality is a way of embodying the humility of Christ, who walked with his disciples, listened to their questions, and invited them to share in his mission. Synodality is especially vital in Asia, where the Church is often a small minority and where relationships with other religions and cultures are essential for peace and understanding. Tagle encourages the Church to be a listening Church, open to learning from the wisdom of others and ready to build bridges of friendship. In interreligious dialogue, he sees not a threat, but an opportunity to discover the seeds of truth and goodness that God has sown in every culture and heart. This approach is not without its challenges. Listening deeply takes time and patience. It requires humility to admit that no one has all the answers and courage to face painful truths about the Church's failures or divisions. Tagle is realistic about these difficulties, but he insists that the journey is worth it. He often recalls the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, who walked together in confusion and sorrow until they recognized the risen Christ in their midst. For Tagle, the synodal journey is a way of encountering Christ anew through the voices, stories, and faith of the whole community. Tagle's commitment to synodality also means empowering lay people, women, and young people to take active roles in the Church's life and mission. He believes that every baptized person has a unique gift to offer, and that the Church must create spaces for all to participate. In his own ministry, he has supported lay movements, encouraged youth leadership, and advocated for the inclusion of women in decision-making processes. He sees these efforts not as optional extras, but as essential for the Church's vitality and credibility. The spirit of synodality is also about facing the future with hope. Tagle invites the Church to discern together the signs of the times, to recognize where God is at work in the world, and to respond with creativity and courage. He encourages Catholics not to fear change, but to trust that the Holy Spirit is guiding the Church into new and surprising paths. This openness to the Spirit is a hallmark of Asian spirituality, where faith is lived with a sense of wonder, gratitude, and trust in God's providence. Synodality for Tagle is ultimately about communion. It is about building a church where everyone belongs, where differences are respected, and where unity is found, not in uniformity, but in love. He dreams of a church that is a home for all, where the wounds of division are healed, and where every person can find a place at the table. This vision is both deeply traditional and radically new, a return to the early Christian communities, and a bold step into the future. As the Catholic Church continues its journey into the third millennium, the witness of Cardinal Tagle and the rise of synodality offer a path of hope. It is a path that calls every believer to walk together, to listen with the heart, and to trust that Christ is present in every step of the journey. In a world often divided by fear and suspicion, the Church's commitment to synodality is a sign of God's dream for humanity, a dream of unity, peace, and shared mission. Part 7. The Gifts of Asian Catholicism. The Catholic Church in Asia is a tapestry of vibrant faith, deep spirituality, and resilient hope. Its unique gifts, shaped by centuries of encounter, suffering, and dialogue, are now coming to the forefront of the global Church's consciousness. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle stands as a living witness to these gifts, embodying the best of Asian Catholicism and inviting the universal Church to learn from its wisdom. One of the most striking characteristics of Asian Catholicism is its profound sense of community. Across the continent, from the bustling cities of the Philippines to the rural villages of Vietnam and India, faith is lived out in families and small Christian communities. The family is revered as the domestic church, a source of strength and solidarity. This communal spirit is not just a cultural trait, but a spiritual asset, fostering a church where every member feels a sense of belonging and responsibility for one another. Another gift is the deep respect for life and compassion for all beings. Asian cultures, influenced by centuries of religious and philosophical traditions, hold dear the values of respect for elders, filial piety, and care for the vulnerable. These values resonate powerfully with the gospel and are reflected in the Church's commitment to the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. Tagle's own ministry is marked by this compassion. His emotional openness and willingness to weep with those who suffer have become a signature of his pastoral style. The Asian Church is also known for its capacity for dialogue and peaceful coexistence. In a continent marked by religious diversity and at times tension, Catholics have learned to build bridges with their neighbors of other faiths. Tagle, born to a Chinese mother and deeply familiar with the complexities of the Church's relationship with China, exemplifies this gift of dialogue. He monitors the Vatican's delicate ties with both the state-sanctioned and underground Catholic communities in China, understanding that the path to unity is paved with patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen. Enculturation is another hallmark of Asian Catholicism. Tagle has long emphasized the importance of integrating the gospel message into local cultures, making faith both authentic and accessible. This approach, while celebrated for its inclusivity and creative expression, is not without its challenges. Some critics worry that too much focus on dialogue and adaptation could compromise core Catholic teachings or lead to syncretism. Yet Tagle and many Asian bishops believe that the gospel, when truly embraced, has the power to transform cultures from within, bringing forth new expressions of holiness and mission. The history of the Church in Asia is also a history of suffering and martyrdom. From the Vietnamese martyrs to the persecuted communities in China and beyond, Asian Catholics have shown unwavering hope and courage in the face of adversity. Their witness is a reminder that faith often grows strongest in times of trial, and that the Church's greatest treasures are not buildings or institutions, but the lives of those who love Christ unto the end. Holiness of life, readiness to offer one's life for the gospel, and a thirst for spiritual values are deeply rooted in the Asian soul. Despite the challenges of modernization and secularization, there is a growing hunger for meaning, prayer, and authentic community among Asia's youth. This spiritual vitality is a wellspring of renewal for the entire Church, offering fresh energy and vision for evangelization. Finally, the Asian Church's gift of hope cannot be overstated. In societies often marked by poverty, violence, and discrimination, Catholics in Asia persist in faith, trusting in the promise of Christ. Tagle's leadership reflects this hope, a hope that does not deny suffering, but embraces it as the path to resurrection. In his words and actions, he calls the Church to remember that the heart of the Church in Asia will be restless until the whole of Asia finds its rest in the peace of Christ, the risen Lord. As the Vatican's center of gravity shifts toward Asia, these gifts, community, compassion, dialogue, enculturation, martyrdom, spiritual vitality, and hope, are not only shaping the future of the Church, but also offering a prophetic witness to the world. Cardinal Tagle, as Asia's quiet contender and bridge builder, invites all Catholics to celebrate and share these treasures, trusting that God is opening new horizons for the gospel in our time. Part 8 challenges, hopes in the crossroads of global Catholicism. As the Catholic Church stands at a pivotal moment in its history, the rise of Cardinal Tagle and the increasing prominence of Asian Catholicism bring both profound hope and significant challenges. This convergence of new possibilities and old wounds is shaping the future of the Church in ways that resonate far beyond the walls of the Vatican. Cardinal Tagle's ascent is seen by many as a sign of hope for a more compassionate, inclusive, and globally attuned Church. His pastoral style, rooted in humility and a theology of mercy, echoes the spirit of Pope Francis and the reforms of Vatican II. Tagle's vision is one of a church of the poor, a church that listens before it speaks, walks with the wounded before offering solutions, and places the marginalized at the center of its mission. His lived experience growing up in modest means, serving in slums, and engaging in humanitarian work gives credibility to his call for a church that is present in the world's pain and hope. In Asia, where Catholics are often a minority and religious diversity is a daily reality, Tagle's emphasis on dialogue and accompaniment is especially relevant. He has been a bridge builder, fostering relationships with other faiths and cultures and encouraging the Church to be a sign of unity and peace. His compassionate approach to contemporary issues, such as the Church's stance toward LGBTQ+ individuals and divorced Catholics, has resonated with many who long for a more understanding and less judgmental Church. Tagle's advocacy for a listening Church that values the dignity of every person is a prophetic response to the wounds of exclusion and division. Yet these very qualities that inspire hope also bring challenges. Within the Vatican and the wider Church, there are concerns among some conservative factions that Tagle's progressive stances could dilute traditional teachings or compromise doctrinal integrity. The resistance to change, particularly around synodality and the inclusion of laity and marginalized voices, reflects deeper anxieties about Catholic identity and the future direction of the Church. Tagle himself acknowledges that much of this resistance is rooted in fear and insecurity, urging all to return to the authentic teachings of Vatican II, rather than caricatures or biased interpretations. Moreover, questions about Tagle's administrative abilities have surfaced, particularly in light of his leadership roles in the Vatican's dicastery for evangelization and as president of Caritas Internationalis. While Tagle is widely praised for his pastoral sensitivity and ability to identify and empower humble, mission-driven leaders, his tenure at Caritas ended amid management and morale concerns, and there have been criticisms regarding his handling of certain abuse cases. These issues raise important questions about the balance between spiritual vision and effective governance, especially as the Church seeks to restore credibility after decades of scandal. Despite these challenges, the hope surrounding Tagle's leadership is palpable across Asia and the global South. Filipino clergy and laity see in him not just a personal success, but a collective affirmation of their faith and resilience. His rise is celebrated as a moment of pride and possibility, inspiring young priests, seminarians, and laypeople to dream of a church that truly reflects the diversity and vitality of the world's Catholics. The global church is at a crossroads. The next pope, whether Tagle or another, will face monumental tasks, healing the wounds of abuse scandals, addressing climate change, strengthening interfaith dialogue, and fostering a more inclusive and participatory church. The conclave that will choose the next leader is not just a religious event, but a moment of global significance, watched with anticipation by millions, from grand cathedrals in Europe to humble chapels in Asia. The decision made will shape the Church for generations, amplifying the voice of Asia and the global South within the Vatican. Tagle's prominence signals the Church's readiness to embrace new perspectives, to walk with humility and hope, and to trust in the Spirit's guidance at this historic crossroads. Whether or not he becomes Pope, his journey and witness are already transforming the Church, reminding all believers that true leadership is found in service, that unity is forged in diversity, and that the future of Catholicism will be written by those who dare to hope and to love without fear. Part 9. The Universal Call to Holiness and the Living Tradition. Cardinal Tagle's vision for the future of the Church is inseparable from the universal call to holiness, a call that is not reserved for a privileged few, but is the destiny of every baptized person. For Tagle, this holiness is not an abstract ideal or a distant goal, but a living reality woven into the fabric of daily life and accessible to all who open their hearts to God's grace. This conviction resonates deeply with the Asian soul, where faith is expressed through family community and acts of compassion, and where the gospel is lived out in the midst of ordinary joys and struggles. Tagle often speaks of holiness as a journey rather than a destination. He reminds the faithful that holiness is not perfectionism, but rather a willingness to say yes to God again and again in the concrete circumstances of life. It is about being present to others, forgiving those who have hurt us, and serving those in need. In this sense, holiness is not measured by extraordinary feats, but by the ordinary fidelity of love, humility, and mercy. Tagle's own ministry, marked by his emotional openness, his solidarity with the poor, and his commitment to dialogue, offers a living example of this accessible holiness. This vision is closely linked to Tagle's understanding of tradition. Drawing on the teachings of Vatican II and the wisdom of Pope Paul VI, Tagle insists that the tradition of the Church is not a static inheritance, but a living reality, a treasure that must be rediscovered and renewed in every generation. He challenges the Church to listen attentively to the Word of God and to the voices of the faithful, especially those on the margins. No single person, no single country, no single local church, or even the greatest saint could have captured the totality of that tradition. Tagle reflects, if it is a living tradition, there is also a living mode of rediscovering it, and the changing times could really push us. For Tagle, the living tradition of the Church means that the gospel must be proclaimed anew in every culture and situation. This requires both fidelity to the core teachings of the faith and creative openness to the signs of the times. It is not about changing doctrine to fit the world, but about discovering the richness of the tradition in new and challenging contexts. Tagle's pastoral approach is marked by this balance. He upholds the beauty of the Church's teachings, presented calmly and without judgment, while also seeking ways to accompany those whose lives are complex or wounded. This approach is particularly important in Asia, where Catholics are often a minority and where the Church must engage in dialogue with other religions and cultures. Tagle's emphasis on listening and accompaniment is a response to the realities of migration, poverty, and religious diversity. He encourages the Church to be a sign of hope and unity, reaching out to those who feel excluded and building bridges of understanding and peace. Tagle's commitment to the sanctity of life is unwavering. He has spoken out against abortion, euthanasia, and all forms of violence against the vulnerable, insisting that the defense of life must be consistent and rooted in the recognition that every person is created in the image and likeness of God. At the same time, he calls for compassion and understanding, recognizing that many people struggle with difficult situations and need the support of the Church's mercy and care. In the context of the Vatican's evolving relationship with China, Tagle's approach to tradition and dialogue is especially significant. He has defended the Vatican's efforts to maintain apostolic succession and communion with Chinese Catholics, even as he acknowledges the complexities and challenges of this process. Tagle's family history, his grandfather's migration from China to the Philippines, gives him a personal connection to the struggles and hopes of Chinese Catholics, and his leadership is marked by a pragmatic, yet deeply pastoral sensitivity to their needs. As the Church's center of gravity shifts toward Asia, Tagle's vision of holiness and living tradition offers a roadmap for renewal. It is a vision that honors the wisdom of the past while embracing the challenges of the present, that seeks unity without uniformity, and that calls every believer to become a witness to the joy and hope of the gospel. In this new chapter, the call to holiness is not a solitary journey, but a communal pilgrimage. Tagle invites the whole Church to walk together, to listen to the Spirit, and to discover anew the beauty of faith in the diversity of cultures and experiences. It is a call to be saints, not in spite of our humanity, but through it to become, in the words of Pope Francis, missionary disciples who bring the light of Christ to every corner of the world. As Pope Francis prepares for his historic journey to Asia and Oceania, Cardinal Tagle's words echo with renewed urgency. This is not a time for fear or nostalgia, but for humility, obedience to the mission, and a deep trust in the Spirit, who makes all things new. The future of the Church will be shaped by those who embrace this universal call to holiness, who cherish the living tradition, and who, like Tagle, walk with courage and hope into the unknown. Part 10. Walking together into the future. As the Catholic Church journeys into a new era, the rise of Cardinal Tagle and the growing influence of Asian Catholicism invite all believers to reflect on what it means to walk together in faith, hope, and love. The future of the Church is not predetermined by geography or tradition alone, but by the willingness of its members to listen to the Spirit to accompany one another, and to respond courageously to the needs of the world. Cardinal Tagle's story is not just his own. It is a mirror of the Church's evolving identity. His life, rooted in the ordinary joys and struggles of Filipino families, has become a beacon for millions who see in him the possibility of a more compassionate, humble, and inclusive church. Tagle's journey from the neighborhoods of Manila to the halls of the Vatican is a living testimony to the power of faith, the strength of community, and the enduring relevance of the gospel in every culture and age. The power shift toward Asia is not about domination or the replacement of one center with another. It is about the Church rediscovering its universal call to communion, a communion that honors diversity, values the gifts of every nation, and seeks unity in the spirit rather than uniformity of practice. This shift asks the Church to be attentive to the voices of the poor, the young, the marginalized, and those who have long been on the peripheries of ecclesial life. It is a call to conversion, to humility, and to a renewed sense of mission. Tagle's leadership style, marked by listening accompaniment and emotional openness, offers a model for how the Church can engage the world's challenges without fear or defensiveness. He reminds us that the credibility of the Church depends not on its power or prestige, but on its willingness to serve, to heal, and to walk with those who suffer. In a world fractured by division, violence, and indifference, the Church's witness of mercy, solidarity, and hope is more necessary than ever. The future that Tagle envisions is one where the Church is truly synodal, a Church that walks together, discerning the signs of the times and responding with creativity and courage. This means empowering lay people, women, and young people to share in the Church's mission. It means fostering dialogue with other faiths and cultures, building bridges of peace, and working for justice and the care of creation. It means being a church where everyone has a place, where wounds are healed, and where the joy of the gospel is shared with all. The journey ahead will not be without difficulties. The Church will continue to face tensions between tradition and innovation, between different cultures and generations, and between the call to fidelity and the need for adaptation. There will be resistance, misunderstandings, and moments of pain, but there will also be new opportunities for growth, deeper encounters with Christ, and surprising manifestations of the Spirit's presence. Tagle's witness encourages all Catholics to embrace this journey with humility and hope. He calls the Church to remember that its strength lies not in numbers or influence, but in the quality of its love and the depth of its faith. The Church's mission is not to conquer, but to accompany, not to judge, but to heal, not to exclude, but to welcome. In this spirit, the rise of Asia in the Vatican is not an end, but a beginning, a sign that the Church is alive, attentive, and ready to be led by the Spirit into new and uncharted waters. As we look to the future, let us walk together as one people of God, trusting that the Lord who began this good work in us will bring it to completion. Let us draw inspiration from the witness of Cardinal Tagle and the vibrant faith of Asian Catholics, who remind us that the gospel is always new, always relevant, and always a source of hope. May the Church in every corner of the world become ever more a home for all, a sign of God's mercy, and a light for the nations. This is the promise and the challenge of our time, to walk together into the future, guided by the Spirit, united in love, and committed to building a church that reflects the heart of Christ for every person in every land for generations to come.